So I should be rolling now. I sure don't want, I'm going to have to look because I sure don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I want to do this and have it. I need to do it again. I'm not going to do a take two today. I'm not in the mood for a take two. It's take one. Take one. And I'm Russell Scott Day. Scott Day as a performer, guitar commentator, and songwriter. My last CD was iPhone Lifestyle. My overview there is iPhone Lifestyle, Outdoor Cats, Beatniks and Spiders, Can I Love the Masses, which is a comedy record, I guess. That was made when I was investigating in my run for senator for state of North Carolina as a working class representative. And I was then, so that's, I'm not going to mention the other one. You got to go looking for it as Scott Day. And then my books, there's about 10 of them. And they're on Amazon author Transcendian. I went to all the trouble of writing all over my clapboard. So, there you see it. As a poet, I was invited to Carter's inauguration. I was invited to Carter's inauguration for book of poetry I wrote, chapbook, I suppose. There were 200 copies made of women, politics, and the 3D space TV. And that got me an invitation to Carter's inauguration. The Common Fool's trip to the inauguration is the film I made. You can find it in the history of Carter. It's a documentary. I made it with a UMIG Super 8 sound camera that had a unique radio input, and I made about 20 SX70 photographs of that event. By 1978, I had come to see that the United States government, United States, could not really be reformed. I couldn't see the United States reformed. So I began working on a country of airports because I was familiar with airports. I worked 10 years as a ground services representative, station agent is what they call them. And I worked for 3 different FBOs and an airline. I also drove a cab after that. I was fired by Piedmont when U.S. Air bought my wife's, U.S. Air bought the company I was working for was Piedmont. I'd worked for Page Abjet there in Rochester, New York, and I became aware of Page's relationship with the CIA and MI6. Because I was impressed with how much more civilized an FBO environment is than anything else, other than 96th Street to Battery Square Park in Manhattan, is my experience. Of course, I began to see how a nation of airports would moderate world economic activity and lead the way. It's for the economist John Commons, it would falls into the cultural lag category. The exploitation of airports has not happened as you wouldn't expect it to in a lot of ways, because airports are only about really not more than 70 years old. They were preceded by grass fields, not airports the way we know them post World War II, when large 4-engine planes would land on landing strips. CBs knew how to make... CBs were very significant as far as the American win in World War II. I said I'm making this for Victor VDHanson, and I'm making it for Michael McFaul, and I'm making it for Elon Musk, and I'm making it for people who, well, they ought to see me as a peer, really. I just said earlier today that I'm the man that Victor Hanson would be if he hadn't inherited a place and isn't wedded to a place. I came from sailors and priests on my father's side, and well-educated Episcopalians on my mother's side. My great uncle was in the Pacific for 4 years as an officer to coast watchers. 4 years he survived in the South Pacific, and he was truly an officer and a gentleman, and has been a great influence on my life. The Boy Scouts were a big influence on my life. They taught me to drive 100 miles an hour. So I didn't inherit any money, and I wasn't necessarily wedded to the place. I spent Christmas by myself one time in New York City, and I wasn't going to do that again, spend Christmas by myself, and I suppose that's one of the major reasons I got back to North Carolina after my business failed in Manhattan. I didn't know how to borrow money, and it's a skill you got to learn. If you're going to be in business, business is about insurance and capitalization and accountancy and an attorney. You need those things. So I worked in motion picture technically, and did an off-Broadway lead. I did voiceover for a national commercial. I don't like watching Mad Men anymore. I watched it with my wife, but watching reruns, too much like going to work it became for me. But I'm founder of Transcendian. I have been that since 1978. For a long time when I was doing stand-up comedy, I would use it as a comedic foil and denigrate myself, and I've stopped doing that. I lost all fictional distance from it whatsoever. It became more and more better and better, and I failed to somehow communicate it to people. Pilots are a difficulty. Pilots and the people who work ground services and all like that, they're a difficulty because they're very into it. The ground services take the lead. They hardly get paid, but they take a lead from the pilots. The pilots are apolitical, and they pretty much rule the world and go anywhere they want. And why worry? It's part of the nature of the beast. And then I was removed from the airport environment for, they called me in, they asked me about my wife's affair or whatever my wife was doing, divorcing me, and Transcendian fired me for something I hadn't written. Really should have sued them, but I just went out and got another job. A lot of times I've thought about things I could have done. But at any rate, I didn't know how to do these things, and I was overconfident, let's say, from time to time. So anyway, that's my introduction to myself. I'm married. I live in, I'm very well married. I live in Carborough, North Carolina now. And I really can't afford to travel. I'm really not all that healthy with, I'm just not couch surfing anymore. So now we're in a situation, I mean, one of the things I'm saying today is that for Mr. Hanson, I admire his history of World War II. And Winston Groom did a wonderful job with 1942, the aviators and the generals. And I read recently the Gulag. I'm an extreme reader, and I take notes. I don't believe that it's a good idea entirely to just be a independent scholar, partly because unless you have a driving goal and mission, you really are not necessarily very focused. And one of the great things about my independent scholarship has been that I've long been focused on what it would take to found a nation of airports. And so first, of course, I studied military history. Napoleon is the one for defending airports, the same thing about, same way you conduct a siege, 2 circles. It's economical, and you have 1 circle looking in and 1 circle looking out. So anyway, you want to defend. There's 2 things you do. You defend and educate. So my nation of station agents, all pilot training is free, and the schools are called flight schools, and all that is paid for by the government. I finally created a currency, and I worked back from the currency I invented towards a test of it to see if it's a good currency, and I found that I discovered a fix for the flaw in Marxism, which is people naturally have an affinity for their own private property, and you're not going to change human nature about that. So my whole thing, my currency, often several times I've looked at other scholars in the universities and the academia, and they got axes to grind, and they've got agendas of their own, and they're resistant to any other ideas that they didn't think of themselves. So, like the baby bond people, Derek Hamilton and William Darity, I sought out. They work about 40 miles from here, maybe, at Duke, and I thought we would be natural. The Transcendian insurodollar is similar to the baby bond concept, except that I don't have any racial division. I'm looking to go past any ideas of reparations. I know my father's side of the family was illiterate, a lot of them, and there aren't any records, hardly, whereas you risk making special people. Darity and Hamilton will tell you flat out there's a racial component to what they're doing, and all I'm trying to do is make it better for labor. I want to unite labor together in the United States or anywhere. Now we've got a problem with the fact that we've gone on and pushed things so far into the future that the future is here, and we're ending up with globalism versus nationalism. And I got a world problem with the climate. Uruguay was a fantastic example of people who just picked up and fixed it. In 10 years, they're all renewable energy. You don't hear about it much, do you? They kicked the TPP people out. The investor dispute settlement court that was part of the TP, as pushed by Obama, certainly did look treasonous, because this court gave away, unless you're a fascist, well, then you go fine for it. Of corporate control as fascist is the goal. So my currency is based on whole life insurance, and you award it to all your citizens at birth, and you have it pay for whatever they need up until the age of maturity when they start to pay in. So then they get their education, and they maybe start a business with some of that money, but the two responsibilities of a government, any legitimate government, king or whatever, is defense and education. So now it's also gotten to the point where people they don't want to recognize that Russia is a problem, because Putin has done what Hitler did, annexing a nation, Crimea, and invading another with tanks even, and invading Ukraine. That's what Hitler did, and he wasn't stopped. So 60 million dead. It's like corruption. Once you let corruption grow within your government, it's almost impossible to get rid of it. Look at China for that one. I don't like China because they blocked me for writings that I was doing, Transcendian war commentary, and I explained how you unite the Bible and the I Ching. And scholars from Confucian Institute or whatever called up and asked if they could link to those writings where I showed how you, I mean, of course, as a writer, the greatest ambition you could have is have a book in the Bible. So, well, it turned out the best I could do is write a chapter that brought the I Ching and the Bible together. I would have more currency of fame if I hadn't been blocked in China. I'm really not fond of them about that. If I have anything to be disfond of China from, that's it. So anyway, as far as this shutdown, if Trump will give us $15 minimum wage and give us legalized pot on the federal level, and give us health care instead of insurance, linked to some insurance company, and give us education, well, we'll give him his wall as long as he puts a bunch of holes in it. We need a statute of limitations on those who committed the crime of coming to this country and finding work, which is encouraged by the Bush administration and both of them, because we needed labor. I wanted to give an aside as far as Victor Davis will understand this when he was talking about the expense of a kamikaze is related to V1. Right now, we have the exoskeletons are unappreciated, and it doesn't make sense to do things out of order. The most important thing you do in your life is learn what the order of things is. So we have wonderful exoskeletons that can maximize the efficiency and potential of the human body, which its skeleton was never meant to lift the weights that we normally expect people to do for too many hours. I always say I picked up too much for too little for too long. And I was wrecked by 57. Of course, psoriatic arthritis, and I had neck operations and all like that, MRSA and all like that. And so that's one of the reasons I don't travel. I do what I do in the studio, or if you'll pay me at a minimum of $3,000, I'll show up. I'm recently interested in showing up and debating Victor VDHanson. He's a fantastic intellect, and I want to see if I can make it as a peer. One of the things that I didn't finish to come up to with about things is that one of the last things I studied before I codified Well, I did economics. I started economics because it was the final frontier as far as Transcendian theory, Transcendian port theory, and I had to get a good grasp on economics after I'd become competitive and competed with my Transcendian Eurodollar, which fixes that problem with Marxism. And so I'm an adherent of Warren Mosler and Stephanie Kelton, and I asked Warren for introduction to Randall Ray, and he wouldn't give it to me because he said he didn't understand Transcendian, which is Transcendian. I'll tell you something. We're getting to the point where we need a government of governments. I was corresponding with Andre Lewin, who wrote the Points for Reinvention of the UN, or he calls it, the essay is a white paper, should we start a new institution or fix the one we got? Well, he believes we need an army for the UN, and I believe we need an enforcement, and I believe in gendarmes, and I believe in, I'm disgusted by Israeli treatment of Palestinians, whether you like them or not. It's like there's justice, and it becomes clear after the Dreyfus affair. Everybody said, well, he was innocent of the charges, and he was cleared, but and he served, but nobody liked him. So maybe you don't like the Palestinians, but there's something horrible about here. You got a port, and I believe that it's time to just send enough gendarmes to keep that port open and operating in a civilized manner. FBOs operate all over the world in a civilized manner, and that's why I want to make a nation of airports, because it's civilized. I could put an office for the UN at every airport. I've encouraged Antonio Gutierrez to do that, and I'd volunteer if I had the money to fly him around having that done. And as I put in my own passport support offices, I can sure tell you I would be able to run an airport. And there's a lot of them that aren't run right. I'd like to lease them, and if you got one you want to give it to me. I could make a whole nation without having a war. I could do it with a substitute war, love movie, Well, they say you got to make 3 movies to make any money. But one of the guys said, you have to make 3 movies because the distributors know how to steal it all before they see you're in it. And I would make a 2D I've written the first part. I say Victor David Hanson could write me the war part. I'm having trouble with that. I got 66 pages, and I got Elvis in it even. I was in Memphis waiting for my father, and he said, here comes the king, and I was about 4 years old, and I wanted to see the king, and the king was Elvis. So I wanted to be Elvis too. It's kind of a rock and roll song, but it's a screenplay about the founding of a nation with Elvis is going to be successful, I'll tell you that. So anyway, if Trump wants that wall, and he really wants that wall because he wants to be